The appointment said menopause. Estrogen dropped. The symptoms were expected, and for a moment, at 52, you finally had a name. What that appointment did not have time to say is what estrogen had been managing before it withdrew. The process that filled that vacancy has a name too. It is called Insulin Lock, and it has been running since the year your last period ended. It is why the weight has been moving to the mint section regardless of effort. It is why the hot flashes arrive without warning and without logic, triggered by nothing you can identify or prevent. And it is why the medication list that was supposed to resolve everything has kept growing, one prescription at a time, each for a different symptom of the same unnamed process. And every time that list gets longer, every time another number comes back out of range, it feels like a personal failure. It is not. The biology changed the rules. Nobody gave you the new map. I have spent 32 years treating women in midlife and beyond, including years when I treated every one of those downstream symptoms without naming the upstream process producing them. What I found when I looked more carefully at what was actually driving this cascade and what clinical research identifies as capable of addressing its root is not something a 15-minute appointment has room to explain. That is exactly why this channel exists. I am going to show you the specific biological process connecting every symptom most appointments treat separately. The compound that peer-reviewed research identifies as capable of addressing that root in postmenopausal women specifically. The exact timing that determines whether it actually reaches the pathway it needs to reach. And the one mistake most women make that cancels results even when everything else is correct. If this kind of evidence-based analysis is useful to you, please subscribe. I post 2 to 3 times a week. 2 seconds. Do it now. Now let's start with what estrogen was actually doing inside your body. Because the word menopause tells you something happened. It does not tell you what that hormone was managing while it was present. Estrogen had 3 jobs, none of which the word menopause ever had time to explain. The first job was calibrating the master regulatory system in your brain. Inside the hypothalamus, the gland that coordinates temperature, appetite, weight, and energy output, estrogen was the calibration signal. Every single day, for decades. It told that system how sensitive to be, how precisely to regulate, and where to hold the thresholds. The second job was protecting the beta cells in your pancreas. These are the cells that produce insulin and regulate blood sugar. Research published in Diabetes documents that estrogen receptors on beta cells, called estrogen receptor alpha and estrogen receptor beta, are directly involved in insulin secretion and cell survival. When estrogen withdrew, those cells lost their primary protective signal. The third job was activating vitamin D, not at the dietary level, at the cellular level. Estrogen supports the conversion of inactive vitamin D to its active form in the kidney. It also enables the function of vitamin D receptors so that active vitamin D can actually reach the cells that need it. A postmenopausal woman can have adequate dietary vitamin D intake and still be functionally deficient at the cellular level because the hormone that enabled its activation withdraws. 3 jobs, 3 downstream systems now operating without their coordinator. The most important of those 3 jobs, the one that connects every symptom you have been managing separately, is the first one, the master regulatory system, the hypothalamic thermostat. Inside the hypothalamus, there is a biological thermostat. It monitors core body temperature continuously. In a normally estrogenized body, it has a tolerance zone, a range of temperature variation it can absorb before triggering a response. That zone is wide enough to accommodate the minor fluctuations of daily life without reacting. After estrogen withdraws, that tolerance zone narrows significantly. Research published in Menopause and in endocrinology documents that the neurons responsible for triggering the thermogenic response, called kisspeptin neurons, are directly modulated by estrogen. When estrogen declines, the threshold for activating those neurons falls. The thermostat that was tolerating a range of variation begins responding to fluctuations it previously ignored completely. Think of a household thermostat calibrated to 72 degrees, with a tolerance zone of 4 degrees in either direction. After estrogen withdraws, that zone shrinks to essentially zero. The same thermostat, a fraction of the tolerance. Any minor variation now reads as an emergency. The triggers: temperature change, blood sugar instability, stress, certain foods. Any fluctuation that would have passed through the tolerance zone without activating anything now triggers the cascade. But the thermostat does more than regulate temperature. The same system governs your weight set point, the specific weight your body gravitates toward and defends. It regulates appetite signaling. It modulates energy output. It coordinates with insulin regulation. 5 functions, 1 calibration signal, 1 hormonal withdrawal. Now here is the connection most content about menopause stops before making. What is keeping that thermostat hypersensitive is not only the absence of estrogen, it is something estrogen was quietly preventing, something that has been building in its absence. And it is what connects the hot flashes to the weight, to the blood sugar, to the medication list that has been growing. That something is called Insulin Lock, and its origin becomes clear once you understand the second job estrogen was doing. Estrogen maintained the health of the beta cells in your pancreas. When estrogen withdrew, those cells lost their primary protective signal. Their function became less precise. Insulin signaling became less efficient. The body began requiring more insulin to accomplish what less insulin had achieved before menopause. This is insulin resistance. But this is not the insulin resistance of someone who ate poorly for 20 years. This is the insulin resistance of someone who lost the hormone that was maintaining the system's sensitivity. Same outcome, completely different origin. Research documents that postmenopausal women develop type 2 diabetes at approximately double the rate of premenopausal women at equivalent body weight. Not because of dietary changes, not because of age alone, because estrogen was protecting the beta cell, and when it withdrew, that protection withdrew with it. The cascade begins from there. Insulin Lock creates blood sugar instability. Blood sugar instability becomes a primary trigger for the narrowed hypothalamic thermostat. Hot flashes intensify. Energy becomes unpredictable. Appetite signals arrive too early and too forcefully. One process, multiple consequences, all from the same upstream cause. But the part most content stops before explaining is this: once Insulin Lock is running, it does not stay contained. It begins a cascade that most appointments treat with separate prescriptions, one for each visible symptom, without ever naming the root that produced them all. Here is what that treatment looks like from the outside when Insulin Lock has no name. Hot flashes. There is a medication for that. Weight accumulating in the midsection. There is a medication for that. Mood instability. There is a medication for that. Joint pain. There is a medication for that. Bone loss. There is a medication for that. Borderline blood sugar. There is a medication for that. Rising blood pressure. There is a medication for that. Every prescription is correct for its symptom. Every physician prescribing it is doing their job well. What the system has not had time to do in a 12-minute appointment is step back far enough to see that those 7 symptoms are downstream outputs of one upstream process. This is not a failure of medicine. It is a function of time. The appointment had room to treat what was visible. It did not have room to name what was invisible. 7 leaks in the same building. 7 separate repair crews. Nobody had time to ask where the pipe upstairs was broken. Now here's the connection most menopause content misses completely. Insulin Lock does not operate in isolation. It creates a second connection that amplifies every symptom I just described. A connection between blood sugar instability and the very hot flashes that appear on that medication list. And it explains something that has puzzled women for years: why two women with identical diets and identical estrogen levels after menopause can have completely different symptom profiles. The connection is this: cortisol, the stress hormone, impairs insulin sensitivity. Every time cortisol rises, the body becomes temporarily more insulin resistant. In a woman with insulin lock, this temporary additional resistance hits a system already operating at reduced sensitivity. Blood sugar instability activates the hypothalamic thermostat, which is already operating with a narrowed tolerance zone. Research published in Menopause, the Journal of the Menopause Society, has documented that postmenopausal women with insulin resistance report hot flash frequency and severity that is measurably higher than postmenopausal women with normal insulin sensitivity at the same estrogen level. Same hormonal profile, different metabolic environment. Nearly double the hot flash experience. This is why two women with identical diets can have completely different menopause experiences. The difference is not willpower. The difference is the metabolic environment around the thermostat. But Insulin Lock does not stop with blood sugar and hot flashes. There is a third system involved, one that most women associate with diet, not with menopause at all. And the relationship between this system and estrogen is one of the most underexplained connections in women's health. Most women think of vitamin D as a supplement they either take or do not take. What most health content never explains is that vitamin D requires estrogen to function properly. The specific mechanism: vitamin D is absorbed in an inactive form. To become biologically active, to deliver its effects on immunity, bone density, mood, and metabolic function, it requires conversion in the kidney. Research published in the Journal of Clinical Endocrinology and Metabolism documents that this conversion is significantly enhanced by estrogen. Beyond conversion, the vitamin D receptor at the cellular level also requires adequate estrogen signaling to function at full efficiency. What this means in practical terms: a postmenopausal woman can be taking vitamin D daily and still be functionally deficient at the cellular level, because the hormone that enabled its activation withdrew, and the adrenal and fat tissue contain an enzyme called aromatase that converts testosterone to estrogen. This enzyme is vitamin D dependent. Without adequate vitamin D activation, less estrogen can be produced from the backup sources. The system that was supposed to partially compensate for ovarian retirement is impaired by the same deficiency it was meant to address. Now here's the part that surprised me most when I first examined this research carefully. Because the relationship between vitamin D and estrogen does not run in only one direction, it runs both ways. When estrogen withdraws at menopause, vitamin D becomes less effective at the cellular level. That is the first direction. But the second direction is equally important. Vitamin D is required for the adrenal aromatase enzyme that produces estrogen from testosterone. When vitamin D function declines, that backup estrogen production is impaired. Less estrogen means less vitamin D activation. Less vitamin D activation means less estrogen from the backup source. Each side of this equation worsens the other. A woman who is metabolically healthy at the time of menopause can enter a progressively self-compounding cycle of both deficiencies, with no dietary change, no lifestyle change, simply as a result of the initial hormonal event. And when the parathyroid hormone detects low vitamin D, it compensates by mobilizing calcium from bone. Research published in the Journal of Bone and Mineral Research documents that some women show measurable bone density decline within the first 12 to 18 months after their final menstrual period. Not gradually over a decade, within months, driven by this cascade. Average bone density loss in the first 5 years post-menopause, 2 to 3% per year. At 10 years without intervention, the cumulative deficit reaches the clinical definition of osteoporosis in a woman who may have had perfectly normal bone density the day her last period ended. I want to be precise here, because this is where most health content gets it wrong. The same protocol that addresses insulin lock at the root addresses several layers of this cascade simultaneously, not by replacing estrogen, by restoring the function of the systems estrogen was maintaining through non-hormonal mechanisms that the research has validated in postmenopausal women specifically. Most women trying to address their menopause symptoms have already tried something: a supplement, dietary changes, phytoestrogens, black cohosh, red clover. Good choice made. The instinct was correct. The map was incomplete. Here is the specific gap. Addressing insulin lock requires targeting the insulin sensitivity pathway, specifically the cellular energy switch that estrogen used to support, and the glucose signaling pathway that regulates how cells respond to insulin. These are not dietary interventions. They are biochemical pathway interventions. And the research on which compounds address these pathways in postmenopausal women specifically is not in the general supplement aisle. It is in peer-reviewed endocrinology and metabolic medicine literature. Not an estrogen mimic, not a generic powder with undefined potency. The specific compound that peer-reviewed research identifies as activating the cellular energy switch that estrogen used to modulate is a standardized extract of berberine, studied specifically in postmenopausal women, addressing the same insulin sensitivity pathway that glucagon-like peptide-1 receptor agonist medications target, through a different, non-pharmaceutical mechanism. The magnitude is different. That is precisely why berberine is a daily dietary addition and not a prescription intervention. And the timing of this compound, the specific morning window that the research identifies as the difference between activating the pathway and missing it entirely, is what I'm going to cover immediately after this. But first, I want you to have the link. I have placed the link to the exact product I reference in this protocol in the pinned comment directly below this video. Do not go looking for it anywhere else. The pinned comment is the first thing you will see when you scroll down. Everything you need is there. I put together the protocol I would hand to a patient walking out of my office, because I have spent 32 years watching women work harder than they ever should have had to, against a process they did not know had a name, and because most of the women in that office looked exactly like you. I use and recommend this because it is the closest commercially available formula to what the clinical research actually supports for women over 60, and because the women on this channel deserve the same answer my patients get. The formula combines standardized berberine for the insulin sensitivity and GLP-1 pathway studied in postmenopausal women, P-synephrine from Seville orange peel to reactivate the thermogenic signal that estrogen used to support, ceremonial grade EGCG, epigallocatechin gallate from green tea for the cellular energy switch pathway, Spanish red apple vinegar to restore the satiety signal the hypothalamic disruption has progressively quieted, Himalayan ginger to stabilize blood sugar and reduce the oscillations that activate the hypersensitive thermostat, Korean red ginseng for hormonal and metabolic steadiness in postmenopausal physiology, and capsaicinoids from Andalusian red pepper for the post-meal thermogenic window that narrows after menopause. 1 capsule, a full glass of water, morning before breakfast, every day. I have seen what happens when women who have been doing the right things for years finally receive the right specification. And I want to tell you about 4 of them. Linda, 58, Columbus, Ohio. Linda was on 3 separate medications for 3 symptoms that had no named connection between them. After 10 consistent weeks on the protocol, her fasting blood sugar moved out of the pre-diabetic range for the first time in 3 years. Her primary care physician asked what she had changed. Barbara, 63, Portland, Oregon. Barbara had declined hormone replacement therapy because of her family history of breast cancer. She kept a daily diary of hot flash frequency for 8 weeks after starting the protocol. The frequency dropped measurably by week 6. She still keeps the diary. Karen, 70, Nashville, Tennessee. Karen's bone density had declined at every DEXA scan for 4 consecutive years. After 16 weeks on the protocol, the next scan showed stabilization. Her rheumatologist noted it in the chart. First time in 4 years without a decline. Helen, 61, Phoenix, Arizona. Helen was skeptical and methodical. She built a daily tracking log. Fasting glucose every morning. Afternoon energy rated on a scale of 1 to 10. Weekly measurements, 90 days. By week 6, her fasting glucose was below 100 for the first time in 3 years. By week 10, her afternoon energy had moved from a consistent 3 to a consistent 7. Helen still tracks her numbers. She has not stopped the protocol. Now here is the timing detail most women starting this protocol miss. Your body's cellular energy switch is naturally more active in the fasted state, before the first meal. The compounds that trigger this switch have a synergistic relationship with that fasted state. When you take the protocol in the morning before breakfast, you are compounding 2 activating signals simultaneously. The timing is not arbitrary. It is where the research and the biology align. The studies measuring metabolic changes in postmenopausal women used 30-day protocols. This is not a medication where you feel immediate relief. You are shifting a biological baseline. 30 days for measurable changes in metabolic markers. 90 days for the full trajectory to become pronounced. Consistency is not motivational language here. It is the mechanism itself. The insulin lock cycle compounds like this. Insulin resistance increases blood sugar instability. Blood sugar instability activates the hypersensitive thermostat with greater frequency. Thermostat activation increases cortisol, and cortisol deepens insulin resistance further. Over years, each link tightens the others. The protocol breaks the cycle at the biochemical level, not temporarily, structurally. Imagine waking up and the hot flash that used to arrive before your first cup of coffee is quiet. Imagine a blood panel where your physician looks at the numbers differently than she has in the past 4 years. Imagine the weight that has been accumulating in the midsection since the year this started beginning to respond. Not because you changed everything you eat, but because your body's insulin pathway finally received the signal it has been missing since the year estrogen withdrew. Every year after menopause, insulin lock advances. The thermostat drifts further from its calibration baseline. The biology does not pause while you decide. The research is already in the journals. The protocol is specific. The link is in a pinned comment. The only question left is whether you are going to give your metabolic system the signal it has been missing, or let Insulin Lock run for 1 more year. I have pinned a comment directly below this video with the exact product, the exact protocol, and the exact timing written out in plain language. It is the first thing you will see when you scroll down. Everything you need is there. Do not wait.